This time we're going to actually dig into Revelation chapters 17 and 18. We spent track 1, or part 1 of track 14, answering the question of what is the identity of Babylon. These next 2 chapters will be all about Babylon and the fall of Babylon. But we took some time to consider what is the identity of Babylon, and we concluded in that it is reasonable to assume that Babylon is literal Babylon, that there's a revived Babylonian empire. And so with that consideration, we're going to make some observations about what is said in these 2 chapters. And we did, because of that choice, then we took 2 chapters and narrowed it down into 1 track. So what I'd like to do is just simply read through the text and make some observations as we go. So chapter 16 ended with a reference to the city of Babylon drinking the cup of the wine of the fierceness of God's wrath. That's verse 19 of chapter 16. Chapters 17 and 18 give us a more full description of what that looked like. And I'll read with you chapter 17, verses 1 through 6. It says this: "Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and talked with me, saying to me, 'Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot, who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication.' So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness. And I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement." And we did already discuss the identity of Babylon. We won't discuss that further here. But I do want to point out here is that Babylon represents the evil, man-made, man-driven culture that has existed since the first people decided to band together and ignore God in Genesis 11. This term Babylon, whether figurative or literal, is a reference to that original nation of Babylon that built that tower in rebellion against God. And this judgment that is coming on Babylon is not merely a judgment on a future kingdom, but it's a judgment on mankind's rebellion in general. Just like Isaiah 13 and 14 mentioned, that we talked about in the last track, we're talking about a global judgment on rebellion against God. So it's not merely this one city of Babylon, but it's a judgment on mankind that the city of Babylon has come to represent. Specifically, this judgment is against sexual immorality, drunkenness, blasphemy, opulence, and persecution of believers. This type of society isn't unique to this future nation on which this judgment falls. It is the future of all societies that ignore God. All of these sins that are mentioned are things that we see. We can see our own nation falling into, and we can look through history and see other nations that have fallen into these traps as soon as they get away from God, or if they never had a foundation in God. We see them falling into these things, and we see these things as the downfall of those nations. Verses 7 through 14. "But the angel said to me, 'Why did you marvel?'" Think back again. It says that he marveled. This woman was called Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And the angel says in verse 7, "Why did you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see that the beast that was, and is not, and yet is. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. When he comes, he must continue a short time. The beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7, and is going to perdition. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. These are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. These will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. As I said, I don't want to comment further on the identity of Babylon, but I do want to discuss what is meant by the term mystery. If not that it is mysterious who Babylon is. This is what a lot of commentators say, that it says mystery, Babylon the Great, and so they want to talk about who is mystery Babylon. And if we are saying that Babylon is literal Babylon, one of the questions that comes up is, okay, then why is it called mystery Babylon if that's just who it is? And so that deserves a discussion. When the word mystery, which in Greek is mysterion, is used in the New Testament, it is almost always explained in context what it is meant. In other words, Paul will say, I tell you a mystery. And then he'll explain that it's Jews and Gentiles together and the hostility is removed. Or, something along those lines. There will be something in context that Paul says, this is a thing. In other words, when the word mystery is used, it usually means here is a thing that has not been understood in the past. Now let me tell you what it is. And so what I'm saying is that here in this context, that's what's happening. We are told about mystery Babylon, and then the angel says, why did you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast. And so I think the same is true in this passage. Some take mystery Babylon in verse 5 to mean that no one knows who Babylon is. However, verse 7 suggests that the mystery is not something to marvel at, and then explains. The mystery is that the beast was, is not, and will rise up out of the abyss. This would make sense if the beast and woman are connected to Babylon. Babylon existed prior to the writing of Revelation, but did not exist when Revelation was written, which, by the way, couldn't be said about Jerusalem or Rome. Those were both very well-established cities when Revelation was written. The part about rising up out of the abyss may seem confusing at first, but not when you consider that it is the power of Satan that helps bring the beast to life. And that's what we are told in Revelation chapter 13, verses 1 and 2. When we're first told about the beast, we are told that it is the dragon who brings the beast back up. And so what we're talking about with Babylon, assuming that we're talking about a literal Babylon, we're talking about Satan being involved in the reviving of this Babylonian empire. And in that way, it comes up out of the abyss. That this new nation, whether literal or figurative Babylon, it is Satan that orchestrates it. And so in that sense, even though it is a human kingdom, it is yet coming up out of the abyss because it's empowered by Satan. Verses 15 through 18. Then he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw in the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind and to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman whom you saw is that great city, which reigns over the kings of the earth. Verse 15 indicates that the beast and the harlot are a global phenomenon. That we're talking about peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. Again, that even though we use the name of a city to describe it, it's not just a city that we're talking about. We're talking about an empire that spans the globe. Just as the first Babylon was a one-world government, so will be the last. Ironically, however, the leaders of this one-world government, the 10 horns, will hate the harlot. They will drink her wine, take part in her sexual immorality, and then they will hate her. It is the nature of sinful man to both crave and hate that which does not satisfy. This is the story of sin of all time. That we both love and hate the things that we crave. And we want it because we think it will satisfy. And we continue and continue and continue to pursue things that we hope will satisfy us. But then we ultimately realize that it does not satisfy, and we hate it. And so this one world government, these 10 horns, hate the culture and the nation that brought them to power, that gave them the freedom, that allowed them to do anything, pursue any sexual immorality, any drug, any alcohol, any lifestyle, do whatever you want. And they become the most hateful and depressed people because after doing whatever they want, they find that it doesn't satisfy. Satan will use this craving to destroy those who will follow him. He cares nothing for his followers. So important to understand the diabolical nature of what Satan does. That he is not helping anyone. He is always bringing destruction. Chapter 18, verses 1 through 8. After these things I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. And I heard another voice from heaven, saying, Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues, for her sins have reached to heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Render to her just as she rendered to you, and repay her double according to her works. In the cup which she has mixed double for her. In the measure that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, in the same measure give her torment and sorrow. For she says in her heart, I sit as a queen, and am no widow, and will not see sorrow. Therefore her plagues will come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judges her. Genesis 11 and Daniel 4, Babylon was represented by a tower and a tree that reached to the heavens. Here John says that their sins reached to the heavens. That what they have done with all of their achievements is they have achieved an incredible rebellion against God. And while they convinced themselves that they were successful, that they were a queen and not a widow, that they would receive joy and not sorrow, they've been wrong. What a way to close the chapter on rebellion against God. Notice that drunkenness is a repeated theme in this passage. Not only in this passage, but in several places in Revelation and in other places throughout the Bible, we talk about drunkenness. But especially when it comes to Babylon, it talks about the nations being drunk with the wine of Babylon. And I don't think that that's just a reference to alcohol as a problem or sin. I think it's because getting drunk is a way to escape reality. God is saying that everyone who gets drunk is pretending that God is not really out there. That we are getting drunk with the power, drunk with the freedom, and becoming overwhelmed with the power of being able to do all of these things, the sexual immorality and everything else. And we're doing all of this to distract ourselves from the reality that God is out there. Whether you get drunk on literal wine, sexual immorality, violence, or whatever else it is that distracts you from dealing with the reality of an all-powerful God, there will come a time that you have to sober up. For the Babylonians, that time has come. Chapter 18, verses 9 through 24. The kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will weep and lament for her. when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city of Babylon, that mighty city! For in 1 hour your judgment has come, and the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise anymore. Merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen and purple, silk and scarlet, every kind of citron wood, every kind of object of ivory, every kind of object of most precious wood, bronze, iron, and marble, and cinnamon and incense, fragrant oil and frankincense, wine and oil, fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots, and bodies and souls of men. I'll stop there for just a second. I want you to notice that the merchants are weeping. But they're weeping because they have no one to sell to anymore. Again, they don't love Babylon, they hate Babylon. They hate everything that nation stands for, but they love what they get out of it. They love to get rich. They love to have all these things. They love to live the luxurious life that they live. And so they're sad to see it destroyed because they're seeing that destroyed and they're seeing money burned. And for that reason, they're sad. The fruit that your soul longed for has gone from you, and all the things which are rich and splendid have gone from you, and you shall find them no more at all. The merchants of these things, who became rich by her, will stand at a distance for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. Every shipmaster, all who travel by ship, sailors, and as many as trade on the sea, stood at a distance and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What is like this great city? They threw dust on their heads and cried out, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city, in which all who had ships on the sea became rich by her wealth. For in 1 hour she is made desolate. The merchants, the shipmasters, weep for their loss of money, their loss of opportunity. And then we see who's not weeping. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her. Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence the great city Babylon shall be thrown down and shall not be found any more. The sound of harpists, musicians, flutists, and trumpeters shall not be heard in you any more. No craftsman of any craft shall be found in you any more, and the sound of a millstone shall not be heard in you any more. The light of a lamp shall not shine in you any more, and the voice of bridegroom and bride shall not be heard in you any more. For your merchants were the great men of the earth, for by your sorcery all the nations were deceived. And in her was found the blood of prophets and saints and of all who were slain on the earth. In the end, when the world system finally collapses, the kings of the earth mourn, the merchants mourn, the shipmasters and sailors mourn, but heaven, the apostles and the prophets and the saints rejoice.
Yes.
When God finally ends rebellion against him, we will not be the ones mourning. We will be the ones celebrating at God's victory over sin and the rebellion of mankind.